Napun Cosmos, the Governor of Central Equatoria State, Honorable Emmanuel Adil Anthony, Honorable Ministers, Honorable Members of the National Assembly, representatives of the UN agencies, Honorable Members of the Diplomatic Corps, and His Lordship, Juba Mayor. Let me say Salaam Alaikum. Let me first begin by thanking you for this invitation to be in the Freedom Hall. You know, today is the freedom celebration for my country, the United States of America. July 4th is the Independence Day, so it's a special honor to be here in front of you. As a former director of the United Nations Environment Program Science Division, and now as its consultant, it is my pleasure to share recent findings from an environmental assessment of the Sudd Wetlands in South Sudan. You all know the importance of the White Nile for international water policy stretching from Lake Victoria to Alexandria in Egypt. The river exits Uganda, then spills into the flatlands and becomes a wetland around the town of Bor. The main channel curves to the west, then back to the east, where the wetland ends around the town of Akol. We start with a few basic facts. The Sudd's estimated area is about 57,000 square kilometers on average. However, this extent changes from season to season and from year to year. High and low flows are normal for the Sudd wetlands and are part of the seasonal hydrology that maintains the Sudd and the livelihoods that depend on it. In fact, the Sudd is characterized by its very dynamic nature, both within a single year and between years. Much of South Sudan's land cover is dry, semi-arid grassland and shrubland. Hence, since water resources are scarce, the Sudd provides a valuable lifeline to the people, the fauna, and flora that inhabit it. Indeed, the Sudd is the largest such wetland in all of Africa. Briefly, let me touch on the hydrology and the meteorology of the Sudd wetland. The environmental assessment report notes that there has been an increase in the Sudd surface area over the last 100 years. However, the rainfall over the wetlands has not increased. This leads us to the hypothesis that the expansion may be due to increased rainfall in the East African highlands. A key message here is that there is much uncertainty in the basic science. In particular, ground measurements are missing. Hence, we must understand regional hydrology as the scientific foundation for any planned infrastructure development on the White Nile in general and the Sudd wetland in particular. Resolving this uncertainty is important because the projections from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change give that same general scenario: more rainfall in the highlands, more variable and possible less rainfall in the lowlands. The key message here is that there is no certainty in these predictions. However, we can expect more flooding and a drought. And hence, we must plan not only for the drought, such as for the floods such as we've had in recent years, but also for the drought, which will come. Due to the lack of time, I will not discuss the importance of tropical wetlands in the Sudd from the perspective of greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. However, I do encourage you to read the report to understand the Sudd's importance as a carbon sink and the possible risks incurred to greenhouse gas emissions from the drying up of the wetlands. Now let's focus on the ecosystem services that the Sudd provides to South Sudan. I want you to think of the Sudd wetland like a sponge. It soaks up water, solar energy, and nutrients. It expands, and then it releases them slowly back to the main channel and to the surrounding environment. By acting as a sponge, the Sudd regulates stream flow, which in turn provides the ecosystem services to the communities that surround it and extend well beyond the Nile. So what are these ecosystem services that the Sudd provides to the region? Without going into a classroom lecture, let me briefly describe the concept of ecosystem services. First, we have what are called provisioning services. These include food for eating, fiber for cloth, wood wood for building and water for so many of our household needs. Then there are those regulating services, such as pest regulation, pollination of plants, etc., which, unfortunately, we often take for granted. Then there are support services, such as the creation of the soil profile, which in turn supports the growth of grass, particularly in the dry season, and which in turn feeds the cows, whose health depends on the seasonal grasslands or toich that the Sudd provides. And the cows in turn allows the young men to find brides because they can pay dowry. They have cows. It's important for them. Lastly, there are cultural services. In the case of the Sudd, its cultural service has allowed the different communities to coexist, over centuries as they intermarry, undertake socio-economic activities together, or share spiritual values. A question for you to consider is whether or not the maintenance of cultural services from the ecosystem promotes the human security, which is of fundamental importance for the young nation of South Sudan. Other examples of ecosystem services from the Sudd Wetland include the annual migration of ungulates, such as the white-eared cob and tiang. In fact, their migration might be one of the largest on Earth, even rivaling the wildebeest migration between the Serengeti in Tanzania and the Masai Mara in Kenya. You might wonder how one would value this service. Indeed, the Nile Basin Initiative did estimate a potential value for tourism at about $600 million a year. I should also mention that the maintenance of migratory bird flyways is an ecosystem service, as the Sudd Wetland is an important stopover point for bird populations migrating between Africa and Europe. I would remind the audience that South Sudan is a signatory of the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands of International Importance. In fact, one of the key recommendations of this environmental assessment is that the government of South Sudan implement its commitment to the Ramsar Convention by conducting baseline surveys. This commitment was made, but not yet completed, due to insecurity. Let me close these words on ecosystem services by mentioning why their evaluation is an important exercise. First, estimates of ecosystem valuation can be used for investment purposes. Estimates inform us which sectors could attract investment opportunities, such as fishing industry, irrigation agriculture, energy production, livestock development, etc. Second, estimates can advise us which services need to be protected. Since regulating and culturing services are not typically valued or undervalued, we can gain insights on the need for protecting these services. Lastly, valuation of ecosystem services can inform the national debate on the pros and cons for draining the wetlands. Often taken for granted, these services are sorely missed when lost. You will see in the report that the Nile Basin Initiative values these ecosystem services at $3.3 billion. $3.3 billion. The key message here is that the sponge function of the Sudd Wetlands makes possible these ecosystem services. This does not fully account for the immense cultural values which are irreplaceable. Now I would like to pull together the results of the rapid assessment into what could be a policy-relevant research program for the Sudd. A key message here is that the answers to fundamental science questions should be researched before embarking on any major infrastructure development concerning the Sudd Wetland. Thank you. Let's start with meteorology. Good for your students out there. And the question is, how much of the moisture that is evaporated or transpired from the Sudd goes back into the system and finds its way back into the Nile River or into the croplands within South Sudan? Now let's take a look at the science of hydrology. Possible questions include, what are the peak and low flows needed to maintain ecosystem services to support livelihoods? Also, is it possible to reopen the Jonglei Canal and send some portion of the high flows downstream? In this regard, we need to assess the accuracy of the current assessments of stream flow volumes. Let me talk briefly about hydrology and meteorology as related to climate change. At the regional and national level, one key question is, how should we interpret the latest IPCC, that is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, projections for East Africa for future management of the Sudd? Another question is, at the regional and global level, are the Sudd wetlands and their extensive peatlands a source or a sink for carbon? Finally, although I mentioned ecosystem services previously, which environmental and social impact assessments are required if the Jonglei Canal is restarted? We should note the importance of collecting and assessing field data in cooperation with the inhabitants. Finally, I would like to close my comments by highlighting the report's key recommendations. Most important is to examine the policies, practices, and impacts of the possible revival of the Jonglei Canal, dredging or building dikes in areas prone to flooding, or other infrastructure development. In so doing, the government of South Sudan should adhere to the core principle of water for the South Sudanese people and ecosystem first. The second recommendation is to deploy an early warning system for flood and drought, including upgrading hydrometeorological services, both regional and national. Lastly, capacity building must be a part of any research exchange with other countries. I thank you for your attention, and I invite you to read the report as you engage in the national debate about the future management of the Sudd Wetland. Shukrani. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Consultant Peter. And we'd like now the Vice President to launch that book by raising it up so that we can distribute it.
Is that 10 minutes? 10 minutes?
Yeah. Sit down. Sit down. Minister of Environment and Forestry, Ministers, Honorable Ministers, Deputy of TNLA,
Thank you so much.
Upper and
I hope it is there. It's
Lower
what you have
House,
explained.
Governor of Central Equatoria,
Thank you very much.
Yes.
MPs, senior officials, all the dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here to launch the book, which were the 3 books which are developed by the Ministry of Environment with a cooperation with UN Environment Program, and they are as follows. One of them is a rapid environmental assessment of Sudd Wetland ecosystem. This book. Again, we have the first national adaptation plan for climate change, Republic of South Sudan. This book. The third one, we have South Sudan second nationally determined contribution. This book. On behalf of the President of the Republic and on my own behalf, we are officially launched. Thank you.
We have the URL for it? Do we have the URL for the location of the report? We must. You can't launch it without a URL.
We have that.
Huh?
They are not streaming it on the website. But UNEP, I think, will now release it on the website today.
Yeah.